Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Ready for another fascinating journey?
Always.
Today, we're diving into a really unique piece of literature. It's called Baron Trump's Marvellous Underground Journey.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And we're going to be looking at it through the lens of an analysis that focuses on Baron's encounters with different cultures during his journey.
It's kind of like we're doing a cultural anthropology study, but,
Hmm.
with this fictional twist.
Yeah, exactly. And using this lens, we can explore some real-world issues in a way that's both engaging and thought-provoking.
I like it.
So the analysis dives into Baron's interactions with three distinct cultures: the Rattlebrains, the Micromen, and the Solonites. And each encounter presents unique challenges, and it reveals something about not only Baron, but also about ourselves.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, let's start with the Rattlebrains. The analysis describes their language as incredibly convoluted, almost like a puzzle wrapped in a riddle.
Oh, I hate riddles.
Yeah.
You got to give me an example. Like, what does their speech sound like?
Imagine trying to follow a conversation where sentences are structured like this. The sky, blue as a bird's desire, sings songs of wind to the ears of mountains.
Wow. Okay. That's beautiful, but definitely not very straightforward.
Right, and I can see how someone like Baron, who seems to value efficiency and directness, would struggle with that.
Totally. And instead of trying to understand the nuances of their language and culture, he just dismisses them as fools. And this dismissal, as the analysis points out, is a reflection of a very real human tendency to judge and dismiss what we don't immediately understand, especially when it comes to communication styles.
Yeah, it's easier to label something as weird or wrong than to put in the effort to truly understand it, right?
Exactly. And the analysis shows how Barron's dismissal of the Rattlebrains leads to some, well, questionable actions.
Oh,
Like there's an instance where he deliberately misleads them to escape a difficult situation.
so he's kind of cunning, but not very ethical, I guess. It seems like his impatience with their communication style ultimately leads him to take advantage of them.
Right, and this raises a crucial question for all of us. Have we ever felt that same impatience or dismissiveness when someone communicates differently? Maybe someone speaks another language, uses a different dialect, or even just has a different communication style. I think it's a natural human reaction, but one we should definitely be mindful of.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in our own ways of thinking and communicating that we forget that there are other equally valid perspectives out there.
Okay, so moving on, let's talk about Baron's encounter with the Micromen.
Okay.
Now, these guys, they're tiny in stature, but they have a huge amount of pride. And the analysis points out that this pride comes from their unique culture, a culture built on, intricate craftsmanship and these complex social structures.
So it's not just arrogance. There's a reason behind their strong sense of self.
Exactly. They've achieved incredible things despite their size, and that's shaped their worldview. Now imagine how Baron, with his own, inflated sense of self-importance, reacts to this.
Well, knowing Baron, I can't imagine it goes very well.
You're right, it's a bit of a clash of egos. Instead of appreciating the Micromen's achievements and understanding their pride, Baron mocks their size and manipulates them to get what he wants. And the analysis draws a parallel here to real-world prejudices based on appearances or perceived power.
Oh, yeah, the analysis mentions a specific anecdote, right? Something about Baron convincing the Microman he's like a powerful being.
Yes, he basically exploits their belief system to get them to do his bidding. And this encounter, while entertaining on the surface, reveals a darker side of human nature. The tendency to exploit others for personal gain, especially when we see them as somehow lesser than ourselves.
It really makes you think about how often we might underestimate others based on superficial traits or just our own preconceived notions. It's like a good reminder that we all have those biases, whether we realize it or not. And it's up to us to challenge them and see people for who they are.
That's a really good point. And speaking of biases and how we view others, Baron's interaction with the Solonites, it kind of takes us into some pretty ethically gray areas.
Yeah, the Solonites. They were described as being made entirely of glass, like super fragile and constantly afraid. I feel like that would make me feel empathy for them, but the analysis suggests that Baron saw that vulnerability and thought opportunity.
Yeah, you'd think that their fragility would make people want to care for them,
Yeah.
right? But Baron, he sees it as a way to manipulate them. And the analysis highlights that he doesn't actually hurt the Solonites physically, but he uses their fear against them, like threatening to expose their fragility unless they do what he wants.
So basically, psychological manipulation. He's not breaking any laws or anything, but it's not exactly ethical either. The analysis seems to be drawing a parallel here to how power dynamics work in the real world.
Right. It's a perfect example of how power can be used in these subtle but still harmful ways. Like, think about it. How often are we in positions of power, even in small ways? Maybe it's at work or in a friendship or even with our families. The question is, how do we use that power? Do we use it responsibly, ethically, thinking about other people, or do we use it to get what we want, even if it means manipulating others?
Yeah, it's easy to judge Barron when we're reading about this fantastical world. But when you think about it in terms of our own lives, it's a little harder to swallow. Have I ever used my position in a relationship to get my way, even if I wasn't being super obvious about it? It's not fun to think about, but it's important to ask ourselves these questions. Right.
Exactly. These fictional encounters, even though they sound outlandish, they're like holding up a mirror to us. They reflect our own tendencies, biases, those ethical dilemmas we all face. And I think they challenge us to confront those parts of ourselves.
So let's take a step back. Thinking about all three of these encounters, the Rattlebrains, Micromen, and the Selenites, what are the big takeaways? What are the themes here?
Well, one of the big ones that sticks out to me is the danger of, like, cultural arrogance. Barron just assumes that he's superior to every culture he encounters. He judges them based on his own values and doesn't appreciate how unique and complex those cultures are. He doesn't even try to understand.
He's acting like they're different species or something, not just different cultures.
Yeah, exactly. And that ties directly into the next theme, which is that whole ethical responsibility thing that comes with power. Whether it's manipulating the micromen or, using the Solonites' fear against them, Barron shows how easy it is to abuse power, especially when we don't see other people as, deserving of respect.
It's like that saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. But even in like everyday situations, those power imbalances exist. It's a good reminder to use our influence responsibly, no matter how small it may seem.
And finally, there's this really powerful message about patience and understanding. Barron's impatience with how the Rattlebrains talk, and his whole dismissive attitude toward other cultures just highlights how important it is to approach differences with curiosity and a willingness to learn. It's about recognizing that our way of doing things isn't the only way. There's always something to be learned from other perspectives.
And, how do we take all of this and apply it to our own lives? I mean, the real world can be just as weird and challenging as any fictional land, right?
Yeah, it's so true. It makes you wonder, if we go into every interaction, every new experience, thinking we're better than everyone else, can we really learn and grow?
I mean, that's the question, isn't it? And I hope everyone listening thinks about that. Imagine going to a place that's completely different from anything you know. How would you deal with all those cultural differences? How would you use whatever power you have in that situation? And the biggest thing, how would you make sure that you treat everyone with empathy, respect, and like you actually want to understand them? It's almost like a challenge, right? To go beyond just like tolerating those differences and really start to embrace them, to see the world through other people's eyes, not just our own.
Right. It's about getting out of our comfort zones and recognizing that there are so many ways to see and experience the world.
Yeah.
I think Barron's journey, with all his mistakes and ethical dilemmas, gives us a way to look at our own interactions. It makes us think about how to be better people, more aware, more empathetic.
So, as we finish up this deep dive into Baron Trump's marvelous underground journey, I'm left thinking about one last thing. If we were to go on our own journey to somewhere totally new, how could we approach the people and cultures we meet with more respect, humility, and a real desire to connect?
Wow, that's a really powerful question to think about. It reminds us that every interaction is a chance, a chance to learn, to grow, to understand the world and ourselves better.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it made you curious, challenged some of your assumptions, and maybe even inspired you to be a little more mindful and empathetic in your own interactions.
Yeah, until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep the conversation going.